We continue now at the top of Daf Kofalef Amud Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 101a. And the previous summit, the Gemara said that according to Rebbe, on the Yom Kavura, on the day of the burial of a person's relative, so he becomes an onen, and the night following, that Aninos Laila is midrabanan. And the Gemara inferred from that according to Rebbe, on the Yom Misa, on the day of the relative's death, so then the Aninos Laila, the Aninos of night, would be a deoraisa. But the Gemara brought a brisa against that, where Rebbe says even the Yom Misa, it's talking about the situation with Aaron and Nadav and Aviah, which the Gemara will discuss on this Amud. Even on the Yom Misa, Rebbe says that the Aninos Laila is Derabanan. And so the Gemara said in the previous Amud, really that is true. Rebbe holds in general Aninos Laila is Derabanan, even if it's the Aninos Laila of the Yom Misa, the night that follows the day of the relative's death. But v'chachamim asu chizuk l'divreihem yoser mishal Torah. The Chachamim, they strengthen their words more than the Deoraisa level, so to speak. And the idea is that, again, not only by the Yom Misa is the Aninos Laila going to be Derabanan, but also by the Yom Kavura, the Aninos Laila is going to be Midrabanan. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, and this is in reference again to the death of Nadav and Avihu, and the karbonos that were brought on the days of the Miluim. And the psukim say as follows over there, Kichein Tzuvesi, this is what I commanded you, Kasher Tzivisi, like I commanded you, and Kasher Tziva Hashem, like Hashem commanded. We will take a look at the full psukim. First, the pasuk says, V'achaltem osa b'makom kadosh, you're going to eat it in a holy place. Ki chokcha v'chok bonecha hi me'ishe Hashem, it's a law, me'ishe Hashem, Kichein Tzuvesi, because this is what I commanded you, that's Kichein Tzuvesi, talking about eating from the carbon. And then it says in the pasuk, Hein lo huva es damel HaKodesh Penima, the blood wasn't brought inside to the Heichel, so Achol Tochlu Osa Bakodesh Kasher Tzivesi, so it should be eaten. And then finally, the last pasuk that was just quoted, Shok HaTruma V'chazeh HaTnufa, it's talking about the Chaz and Shok, Al Ishe HaChalovim Yaviu L'hanif Tnufa L'fnei Hashem, V'hoyo L'cho U'Levanecho Itcha L'chok Olam Kasher Tziva Hashem, that's where it says Kasher Tziva Hashem. And as the Gemara continues, we will explain the various karbonos that are being addressed over here on the days of the Miluim. But in any case, the Brisa says as follows, Kichein Suvesi, it says in the pasuk, Kichein Suvesi, that means, Ba'aninos yochlu, you should even eat from the carbon when you're in the state of Aninos. Kasher Tzivisi, as I commanded, B'shas Maisa Amar Lahen, that means he said this to them at the time of the actual incident. And Kasher Tziva Hashem, he said like Hashem commanded, Lo Me'elai Ani Omer, I'm not saying it on my own, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying over here. And Rashi explains, going back on the Chachamim asu chizuk l'divrayim yoser mishal Torah, v'chachamim asu chizuk l'divrayim yoser mimasha asta Torah lidvoreh. What's the yoser over here? It's not more than the case of the Yom Kavura. On the Yom Kavura, we say the Aninos Laila is Derabanan, and on the Yom Misa, we say that the Aninos Laila is Derabanan. So Rashi explains what the Gemara means when it says that chizuk l'divrayim yoser, it's mimasha asta Torah lidvoreha. The Torah had a certain rule for the Aninos, and the Chachamim went beyond that rule. The Chachamim said that there's Aninos Laila. And then in the psukim by the Miluim, Kichein Suvesi, what's Kichein Suvesi talking about? B'minchas Shmini Ksiv. This is talking about the mincha that was brought on the Shmini, which is the 8th day of the Miluim. It says, Kichues HaMincha, take the carbon mincha. Ba'aninos, and we're talking here about a situation of Aninos, the Nadav Avihu, because Nadav and Avihu died, and so therefore Aaron and his sons, they were in a period of Aninos, Kasher Tzivisi, and then the pasuk says, like I commanded, that's Bechatos the Rosh Chodesh. That's the chatos that was brought on Rosh Chodesh. Shenisrafa, and that one was burned. Ksiv hein lo huva estama. That's where there's a whole conversation that the Gemara is going to go into as we continue in the Gemara, where the conversation speaks about hein lo huva estama. The blood was not brought inside of the Heichel, inside of the Mishkan. And Rashi continues, B'shas Maisa, again, we darshan Kasher Tzivisi, that it's B'shas Maisa Amar Lahen. What that means is, Kisheira Lahem Aninusam, when that Aninos happened, when they became acute mourners, Amar Lahem, he said to them, Shelo Yimnu Me'achilas Kodshim Hayom. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to them, you should not refrain from eating Kodshim today. Sheshama Mipi HaGvura, because he heard from the mouth of the Almighty, Shecholok Aninos Hayom B'Kodshim Mishar Yomim. The Aninos today is different when it comes to Kodshim from other days. Uchesherosh and nisrfa, and when he saw that the carbon was burned, Amar lahem, he said to them, Achol tochlu osa, he said, eat it, meaning Haya lachem laochli, you should have eaten it, Kasher tzivisi eschem b'shas ma'isa, like I commanded you at the time, Kasher tziva Hashem, and then again it said Kasher tziva Hashem, and we learn from Kasher tziva Hashem that it's from Hashem and not from me. That's ba'achilas chazav v'shok shel shalmei tzibur. That was in reference to the eating of the chazav v'shok, as we saw in the pasuk. It says shok hatruma v'chazei hatnufa. That's the chazav and shok of the shalmei tzibur. Shekarvu bo bayom. That was also brought on that day. Nemar. That's what that pasuk is talking about. V'lo me'elai ani omer la'ochlam ba'aninos. It's Hashem saying that it should be eaten. I'm not saying it on my own that it should be eaten ba'aninos. And the Gemara continues, Uraminhi. Now we have the following contradiction. The following brisa will contradict what we just said above. It says in this brisa, Mipnei aninos nisrfa. It says that it was burned because of aninos. That's why the carbon was burned. Lekach nemar ka'ela. That's why it says in the pasuk the word ka'ela. And Rashi explains, Mipnei aninos nisrfa lekach nemar. That's why it says in the pasuk vatikrena osi ka'ela. What happened to me was the following circumstances, basically meaning I'm in a state of aninos. Umatzinu shahod Moshe. The point of the brisa over here is that Moshe admits to what Aaron is saying. Moshe agrees with what Aaron is saying. As it's written, Vayitav be'einav, it was good in his eyes. V'mipi ha'gvura shama heter aninos lebo bayom. Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu had heard that there's a heter in this situation of aninos, that they are supposed to eat the carbon, lama hoda, why did Moshe Rabbeinu admit to Aaron? In other words, this brisa seems to be saying that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that really Aaron was correct in burning the carbon and it should not have been eaten. And the brisa we just brought above said that really Moshe Rabbeinu was saying it's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that they should eat the carbon, and that's the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Shmuel, Shmuel says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Hareb Yehuda, one brisa is following Reb Yehuda, and Hareb Nechemya. The other brisa is following Reb Nechemya. Some have the girsa here of Hareb Nechemya, one brisa is following Reb Nechemya, and Hareb Yehuda v'Rebbi Shimon. The other brisa is following both Reb Yehuda and Rebbi Shimon, as we'll see in a moment. But in any case, again, the two brisas represent the opinions of different Tanoim. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Mipnei aninos sarfua. The reason why they burned the carbon again on this 8th day of the Miluim was because of the fact that they were in a state of aninos. Lekach nemar ko'ela. That's why it says ko'ela, because again Moshe Rabbeinu was admitting that was correct to burn the carbon. Divrei Reb Nechemya. These are the words of Reb Nechemya. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say Mipnei tuma nisrafa. The reason it was burned was really because of tuma, because of impurity. Aninos would not have been a reason to burn the carbon. She'imata omer mipnei aninos nisrafa, because if you're going to say that it was burned because of the state of aninos, so hayu l'shlashdan sheyisrafua. So first of all three karbanos should have been burned. Davar acher, another explanation, hayu roy la'ochlan la'erev, but they still would have been able to eat it in the evening. You can't eat it today, but the aninos laila would not have posed a problem. Davar acher, another explanation, valo Pinchas haya imoin. Pinchas was with them. He was not in a state of aninos, so it can't be that aninos is a reason to burn the carbon. You have all of these reasons why that cannot be the case, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say it was because of tumah that it was burned. And Rashi explains, Mipnei aninos nisrafa, again, according to Reb Nechemya, it was burned because of aninos. Shelo hutra lehem aninos levo vayom, because aninos was not permitted for them that day. V'lesle the Reb Nechemya hach drasha deva aninos yochlu. Reb Nechemya does not agree with the drasha that it should be eaten by aninos. Elachi kamar lo kichein suvesi she'af mincha sibor zu. He said to him, this is what I commanded, even this communal carbon mincha, shelo matzinu mincha krevel et sibor kayotzeba, where we don't find any other mincha that is offered for the community like this, ne'achelis, it should be eaten. V'al ha'aninos lo huzkar l'Moshe lidrosh kal v'chomer me'maiser. And with regards to aninos, it was not mentioned to Moshe to darshan the kal v'chomer that the Gemara will bring in a moment from maiser. Ucheshehizkiru Aaron, and when Aaron mentioned this, hodalo, he admitted to him that again it was mimnei aninos nisrafa. It was supposed to be burned because of the aninos. That's the opinion of Reb Nechemya. And again, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, mipnei tumah nisrafa. The reason why the carbon was burned was not because of aninos. It should have been eaten in terms of the aninos, but it was because of the tumah. Shenaga ba tumah bechatos shel soyer rosh chodesh. The tumah, there was tumah that touched the chatos of the soyer that's brought on Rosh Chodesh, shekarva bo bayom, that was also brought that day. Shehukam hamishkan b'Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the Mishkan was put up on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, v'hu haya shmini leMiluim. This was the 8th day of the Miluim, as we mentioned. And Rashi now details several of the karbanos that were brought that day. Ushlosha seirim karvu bo bayom. There were 3 goats that were brought that day, and they were as follows. There was the seir Nachshon, there was the goat of Nachshon ben Aminadav. Useir Rosh Chodesh, and then there was also the seir of Rosh Chodesh that we just mentioned. Useir Shebol, and then there was also a goat that was brought just at this time of the Miluim. Kedichsiv, as it's written, Kechu Sirizim Lachatos, it says bring a Sirizim as a Chatos, Veshel Rosh Chodesh Nisrafa, and it was the seir of Rosh Chodesh that was the one that was burned. That's the one that we're discussing now in terms of the fact that it was burned. Why was it burned? Again, we have a machlokus over here. Either it was burned because of Aninos, or it was burned because of Tumah. Kedamina Lakaman, as we'll say later on. And again, the Brisa said, Hayo lehem l'shloshton. It must be because of Tumah, because if it was because of Aninos, all three, meaning the Shlosha Seirim, all three of those he-goats that were brought that day, Karvu lehem, which were brought Kedel Kamon, if it was because of Aninos, all three of them would have been burned. That's what Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon argue. Therefore, since only the soyer of Rosh Chodesh was burned, that indicates that it was not because of Aninos, but some kind of Tumah must have occurred with the soyer of Rosh Chodesh. And Hayo lehem lo'ochlam lo'erev. Furthermore, if it was Aninos, why burn the carbon? You can eat it in the evening. Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Afa gav damar Aninos laila doraisa, even though he says that Aninos in the night is doraisa, but modahu de la'oso hayom, he would admit that for that particular day, hotra lahen Aninos laila, that Aninos laila actually was still permitted for them. And v'chol shegein Rabbi Shimon, Rashi says that's for sure true according to Rabbi Shimon, the afladoros eno elami divrei sofrim, because Rabbi Shimon holds that even for all generations, Aninos laila is only the Rabbanan. Well, the Kamon Mefarish Tam de Reb Nechemia, as the Gemara goes on, it will explain the reasoning of Reb Nechemia. And then also the Gemara said, Valo Pinchas Haya Yimoin. It can't be because of Aninos, because Pinchas was there. Shelo Haya Onin, because he was not an Onin. He could have eaten if the issue was Aninos. Well, the Kamon Parach Shaper Ko Amri Lei, and the Gemara later will ask, aren't they saying this argument? Isn't this a good argument that they're saying to Reb Nechemia? And so in any case, returning to the Gemara, again, Shmuel's answer is the Brisa, which says, Mipnei Aninos Nisrafa, that is following the opinion of Reb Nechemia, who says, Mipnei Aninos Sarfua, and the other Brisa, which says that they should have actually eaten it, so that follows Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who say, Mipnei Tumah Nisrafa, that it was actually burned because of Tumah, because Aninos would not have been a reason to burn the carbon, but Aninos Yochlua, they really should be eating it in terms of the Aninos, that would not have been a reason to burn the carbon. And the Gemara now continues with another answer to the contradiction in the Brises. Rava Amar, Rava says, Idi v'idi Reb Nechemia. Actually, both Brises are Reb Nechemia. Again, Reb Nechemia, who says, Mimnei Aninos Sarfua, is actually the author of both Brises. And so how do we explain the contradiction in Brises according to Reb Nechemia? It seems that they should burn the carbon. Why does one Brisa say they should eat the carbon? Velo kasha, it's not difficult. Kan bekod sheishah, kan bekod sheidoros. Reb Nechemia makes a distinction between carbonos that were just brought at that time of the Miluim and carbonos that would be brought for all future generations, and that explains the contradiction in Brises. The Brisa which says that they're supposed to burn the carbon, so that's talking about burning the carbon of Rosh Chodesh, the Kodshe Doros, that is supposed to be burned. But the Brisa which says that the carbonos should be eaten, that was talking about the Kodshe Shah, just those carbonos that were brought at that particular time. As Rashi explains, Idi v'idi Reb Nechemia. Reb Nechemia is the author of both Brises. V'islei Reb Nechemia, and Reb Nechemia holds the hutra aninos b'mincha, that when it comes to the carbon mincha, aninos is permitted, meaning to say the carbon can be eaten. T'chsev kichein suvesi, like it says kichein suvesi. V'afilu achi, but nevertheless, bisar shel Rosh Chodesh, when it comes to the he-goat that's brought Rosh Chodesh, for Rosh Chodesh, that's really a kodshe doros, hoda ledivrei Aaron. So there, Moshe Rabbeinu admitted to what Aaron said, and said, actually, it should have been burned. V'lo kasha mincha, and it's not difficult from the mincha, because kodshe shahi, that was just a carbon that was brought at that time. V'horas shah haisa b'shatochalon, and so there was a horas shah, that something that's kodshe shah should be eaten in aninos. Avol sir shel Rosh Chodesh, but when it comes to the he-goat of Rosh Chodesh, kodshe doro, saying that is something that is for all generations. Moshe kishakotzaf, and when Moshe got angry about it, he was making a mistake. Kisavar kevon sheshamati heter aninos b'mincha, he thought, since I heard that aninos is permitted when it comes to carbon mincha, that it can be eaten, hu adin lechatos. The same is true by the chatos. V'yamar lo Aaron, and Aaron said back to him, Shema dafka kodshe shah shamata v'hodelo. Maybe you only heard that about kodshe shah, and he admitted to him. And again, Reb Nechemia da'amar mevnei aninos nisrafa. Reb Nechemia said that it was because of aninos that it was burned, and again, that's talking about kodshe doros are burned because of aninos, but that would not apply to kodshe shah. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Nechemya hechi mitaretz lahani kroi. Rabbi Nechemya, how does he explain the psukim, meaning the psukim of the conversation between Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron? Now that we understand the position of Rabbi Nechemya, how does he explain those psukim in terms of the karbonos that were brought on the 8th day of the Miluim, in light of the fact that they were in a state of aninos due to the death of Nadav and Avihu? How does Rabbi Nechemya explain the psukim? V'Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan, that refers to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon above, hechi mitaretz lahani kroi. How do they explain the psukim? And the Gemara now explains. Rabbi Nechemya mitaretz lo hachi. Rabbi Nechemya explains the psukim as follows: Madua lo achaltem. Moshe Rabbeinu asked, "Why didn't you eat the karbonos?" Amar lo Moshe li Aaron. Moshe said to Aaron, "Shema nichnas dama lifnai v'lifnim." Maybe the blood went inside of the heichal, and as we've said, when the blood of a chatas goes inside, that is a disqualification. Maybe that's why the carbon was burned. Amar lo. So he said back to him. Aaron responded, "Hein lo huva es dama." The blood did not go inside. And so then he asked, Shema chutz l'mechitzasa yatzasa. Maybe it left the area where it's supposed to be. It went outside of the area it's supposed to be. Amar lo, he said to him, B'kodesh. I said, that's not the case either. It was in the Kodesh. V'dilma ba'aninos akriv tuha upsal tuha. Maybe it was offered in a state of aninos, and it was disqualified. Amar lo, he said to him, Moshe, v'chiheim hikrivu, he said, it wasn't brought by my sons, who are not Kohanim Gedolim. They would not have been able to offer the carbon, to bring the carbon in a state of aninos, but did they bring it? Ani hikrafti, I brought it, I'm the Kohen Gadol. So it was brought in a way that was not a disqualifying fashion. V'amar le, so he said to him, hein lo huva as dama. It was not, the blood was not brought inside. Uva kodesh, I said, it was in the proper area, it was in the Kodesh. Achol tochlu osa kasher tzivesi. So you should eat it in the fashion that I commanded. It should have been eaten. Ba'aninos yochlu, it should be eaten even in the state of aninos. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu said. Amar lo, so Aaron responded, V'atakureno si ko'ela, if such circumstances happen to me, v'yachalti chatas hayom, I should eat a chatas today. Hayita v'nei Hashem, is that good in the eyes of Hashem? And again, the way Rabbi Nechemya explains that line is as follows: Shema lo shamata ela b'kodshei shah. Maybe what you heard, that the carbon should be eaten, is by the karbonos that were kodshei shah, that are just brought now during the times of the Miluim. De'i b'kodshei doros, because when it comes to kodshei doros, like the soyer of Rosh Chodesh, kodshim for all generations, karbonos that would be for all generations, there we have the following kal v'chomer mi meiser hakal. We can make a kal v'chomer from meiser, which is more lenient. Uma meiser hakal amar Torah. If by meiser, which is more lenient, the Torah says, Lo achalti ba'oni mimenu, I shouldn't eat it in a state of aninos. But kodshei doros, when it comes to kodshei doros, lo kol shekain, isn't that certainly the case? Miyad, and immediately, vayishma Moshe vayitav be'enov, Moshe heard it was good in his eyes. Hoda v'lo bosh, he admitted he was not embarrassed. V'lo bosh Moshe lomar lo shamati, he wasn't embarrassed to say I didn't hear. Elo amar, rather he said shamati v'shochachti, I heard and I forgot. That is how the conversation is explained according to Rabbi Nechemya. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Now Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, Hechim etartzilo, how do they explain the psukim? Hachim etartzilo, this is how they explain the psukim. Madua lo achaltem es hachatos b'mokom hakodesh. Again, why didn't you eat the chatos? Shema nichnas dama lefnai v'lefnim. Maybe the blood went inside and it was disqualified. Amar lo, he said to him, hein lo huvas dama, the blood wasn't inside. Shema chutz l'mechitzasa yatzasa, maybe it went outside of its partition, its proper area. Amar lo hein ba'kodesh haisa, he said it was in the kodesh, it was in the proper area. V'dilma ba'aninos akriv tuah psal tuah, maybe it was brought in a state of aninos, it was offered in a state of aninos and disqualified. Amar lo, he said to Moshe, hein hikrivua de paslabu aninos, he said to Moshe, did they bring it where it would be a disqualification of aninos? Ani hikraftia, I'm the one that brought it. V'dilma agav miraraychu pashatu ba v'itmoy, and then Moshe asked, maybe because of the fact that you were in a state of bitterness, because again Nadav and Avihu died, maybe you made some kind of mistake and you made it tameh. Amar lo, he said to Moshe, kachani beinach, he said, Moshe, is this how you view me? Sha'ani mevaze kodshei shamayim, that I would disgrace kodshei shamayim. V'atikurena osi ko'ela, and this happened to me. V'afilu eila v'cho'ela, ein ani mevaze kodshei shamayim. Even in these circumstances, I would not be mevaze kodshei shamayim. Amar lo, so he said to him, v'hein lo huvas dama, if the blood wasn't brought inside, uva kodesh ha'isen, it was in the proper place in the kodesh. Achol tochlo osa ba'kodesh kasher tzivesi, so you should eat it in the kodesh as I commanded. ba'aninos yochlu, it should be eaten ba'aninos. Amar lo, he said to him, Shema lo shamata ela balayla. Maybe what you heard is that it should be eaten at night. Di'i bayom, because during the day of the aninos, kal v'chomer min meiser hakal, we should make a kal v'chomer from meiser. Uma meiser hakal amra Torah, if by meiser, which is more lenient, the Torah says, lo achalti ba'oni mimenu, that I didn't eat it in a state of aninos. Kodesh chomer lo kal shekain, when it comes to kodesh, certainly, so again, bayom, certainly it should not be eaten. Miyad vayishma Moshe, immediately Moshe heard, and Rashi explains, Heichi mitaritz lahani kroi. How does he explain these psukim, the osa parsha of that parsha? Mai omar Moshe, what did Moshe say? Umay ahadre, and what was the response? Linyan aninos, in terms of aninos, umay hakitzafun, umay hoda, and what was the anger and what was the admission? And Rashi continues, v'rabbanan Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbanan, which refer to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, heichi mitaritz lahu linyan tuma. How did they explain it in terms of a tuma discussion? Shema nichnas damu lefnim michuvaso atolamid. You learn this question from the response. Shekach amar lamitchila. He must have said to them first, midakamar hein lahuva pnima, because the response was it wasn't brought inside. He must have suggested maybe it was. Amar lo Aaron Moshe. Aaron said to Moshe, Moshe heinik rivu bitmiya. Did they bring it? V'chi bonai shem hediotim shimshu hayom. Is it my sons who are regular kohanim that serve today? V'halo ola yital to kol avoda. You place the entire avoda upon me. Kedechsiv, it's written, Kravel mizbech v'aseh v'ani kohen gadol. Ani am a kohen gadol, makravonin, and I do offer when it's onen. Kasher tzivesi b'mincha, again, as was commanded by the carbon mincha. Kod sheisha, when it comes to kodshim just at this moment, meaning again at the miluim, kagon mincha shechovas shah haisa, like this mincha, which is an obligation right now, ve'ena noheges ladoros, but not for all future generations. Miraraichu, because of your bitterness, or tzarechem, because of your pain. Shani mevaze kod sheishamayim la'asiach daiti mehem, again, would I be mevaze kod sheishamayim and turn my attention away? Afilu eila v'cho eila, even if it happened to me like this and like this. Avelos iruni ein ani mevaze, I would not, even in the state of avelos, I would not disgrace the Kodesh Shamayim. V'hainu d'chsiv ko'ela v'lo ksiv ela. That's why it says ko'ela and not ela. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis.